Hello and welcome to Ivory Blush Roses. My name is Lisa. I thought we were all done with the rickrack sampler, but I've thought of so many more stitches that I wanted to try that I'm adding 10 more pieces of rickrack to the sampler today, and we're going to be stitching on 5 of them. Let's get stitching. I'd like to fill in these spaces along here where they're a little more widely spaced. I'm marking the halfway point between these strips. I know they're going to be pretty close together. I think my whole sampler will look nicer without these big gaps in between them. I'm just going to take my strips of rickrack and we're going to put it in here. I'm going to pin them down. I'm going to use the little applique pins. I'm just trying to pin straight on that line because I was frustrated with how crooked I was getting stuff. I'll show you how I do this first one in case you're interested in the invisible basting process, and then I'm going to do the rest of them off camera. I'm working from the front side, and I'm going to come up, and I'm actually going to remove that pin immediately, and I'm just going to take a teeny tiny back stitch. I'm coming up right here in the center of that point, and I'm taking such a tiny stitch with a matching thread, and I'm just using regular Coats & Clark Dual Duty sewing cotton, and I'm just taking a teeny tiny back stitch. I want to go over 1 or 2 threads at most. I don't want to see it. I just want it to hold the rickrack in place so that when I get to stitching my embroidery stitches, it's not going to move on me and hopefully will be as straight as possible. It doesn't take very long. It goes pretty quickly, taking big stitches. I think we can remove that one now. There's one line. I don't know if you can see that line since it's basted in thread that's roughly the same color. There's just a little line of stitching along the back, but now that's held down and I can just stitch. I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these stitched on, and then we'll get to working on some new stitches. I got the rickrack basted on, so I've got 10 pieces in all, and we're going to get started with stitching. I'm using my Valdani thread again. I definitely prefer stitching with pearl cotton over embroidery thread these days. I've gone over my supplies in all the other videos, so I'm not going to do that in this one. When we did the feather stitch, I told you I was doing a maidenhair stitch. This is not maidenhair. It's actually a double and a triple feather stitch. Maidenhair is done using the straight feather stitch base. So that's the first one that I want to do. We're just going to start here. Let's go back and look at this straight feather stitch. We came out up in the center of that. And I have to watch where I want that straight line. So when you run it, you can see it's not really quite in the center. It's going to be off just a little bit. So when I come up here, I'm going to come up just inside of this. Now I'm noticing that this rickrack has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ribs. And I'm going to come in about 2 ribs. So I'm going to do that on each side of those inner arches. When I'm doing this, my stitch comes straight down the center. I'm still stitching up to the top, but I'm stitching straight down on that center line. I got to maintain that center line. All right, so there's 3 spokes coming down. We're maintaining our center line. Now we're going to swap and do the other side. My thread goes to the outside of where I'm at. I'm going to come up outside and come in, like I said, about 2 of those little ribs, which I know is hard to see on camera. We're going to come back up straight out. We're going to go straight underneath that one that we did before. And straight down. So I'm not counting my little ribs anymore in here. But you start to see, and I've gotten my tension off here, hold on, a little better. And then we're going to come back up here. Now we're going, now that first stitch, to keep my straight, I'm counting my little ribs. Come out straight from the top. I don't want to stitch through my mat. And I'm coming down straight below and another one straight below. So you see we're starting to have that mostly straight line. If I pull in my stitches tight enough. I don't have it in the frame right now, and I may need to swap and do that. So now we're going to come up, and I didn't catch. So loosen it up and go back. I think we need to put it back on the frame. All right, back to stitching. Let's see if this works a little easier now that I have this under tension. Maybe I just need to pull that back out here. I'm just not happy with how that looks. Let's start this over again. So coming down straight out, and I'm going to come back up, maintain my spacing all the way down next to that thread. And it's a little bobbly right there, but it's better than it was. So we're going to leave it. I'm going to come up here, go back straight out, and I'm coming back parallel to that thread, leaving enough of a space that you can see the parallel nature of it. Okay, that's looking better. Now we're at this other side. And I think that instead of coming up a full 2 in, I'm going to come in ever so slightly. And the reason I'm doing that is I think what's happening here as it's bobbling out is my needle is coming up too far over. And I think I just stitched all of that off camera. My apologies. So I'm going to come up. I've laid out my thread, and to keep that straight line, I'm going to come up just inside of it. I'm going to go out parallel that way, and then we're going to run our thread parallel against it. And now we're switching to the other side, but I'm bringing my thread down to see where I need to go. Bring my needle out, and then we're going to come back up on the inside opposite for this one. So I'm hoping you can see what I was doing wrong on the other one. We were doing the normal alternating feather stitch and ended up with a double and a triple instead of that. So this is a triple maidenhair. Again, I want to come up on the inside of my thread to maintain that straight line. We'll do this, and we need to change threads because I don't have enough thread to complete another full pattern, and I like to do that. So I'm just going to come straight down on the other side of that to lock it in place and then go back. I apologize because I think the battery in the camera died. To start my new thread, I just came up right in the middle, right where it would have come up before, and we're going to go out and make one more repeat of that, doing it in the same manner. And again, coming up inside my straight thread. All right, now we're going to go and make a double maidenhair. And it's going to be the exact same way, it's just we're only doing 2 legs instead of 3. And so it's going to look very similar. I'm not stab stitching it, and then I'm starting to get a little more bobbly line here. And I just keep stitching out of camera. I apologize. So when I don't have as many legs, I can leave a slight bigger gap in between them in this V here. And if I wasn't stitching on rickrack that was determining my spacing, I could also enlarge that. And straight out. I'm just ending this one slightly past the end of my rickrack because I wanted to finish the pattern. I need to do a little tightening up all the way down here, I think. I got one stitch that I didn't pull quite tight enough. It means I have to go all the way, tighten every one of them. So I'm just pulling on the vertical stitch to tighten those up a little bit. Let me just knot this and then we'll take a look. So there we have our maidenhair stitch with 3 spokes and then with 2 coming down. I really like this stitch. I use it so much in most of my crazy quilting. I've never used it on rickrack before, but that ended up being a great variation. Let me show you back to this one that I stitched in error, and so you can really see the difference. You can see how this one bobbles back and forth, and this is relatively straight, and that's the difference. That's why this is double and this is triple feather stitch, and this is maidenhair, triple and double. Now we're going to switch, and we're going to do a little bit more with both herringbone and with chevron, because I felt like there were so many other possibilities that we completely missed with these stitches. Let's start working on those. And we have a herringbone right here, so we're going to do some other herringbone variations here. So I'm ready to continue on. I've got a helper, as you can see. Such a help here. Yeah, a good companion, not so much help with stitching, but he thinks his spot is right here with me. I have come up with so many more ways of stitching herringbone and chevron and even the cretin stitch. We're just going to fill this with an assortment of things and see how it goes. I'm going to start off, if Mr. Mushu will let me, I'm going to start off with a herringbone. Since we're at a herringbone right here, let's keep this one here right next to it. This herringbone we crossed over, and our crosses are out here in the little valleys. So this time we're going to stitch it completely on the rickrack. So I'm going to go down on the far side of the peak, and we're going to come back up, I guess on the near side. I'm not really quite in there. We'll make it work here. And we're going to go down. I want to be stitching all in, and we're going to come back up also in the rickrack, just barely. And then we're going to go back down. And because this is small rickrack, it's probably not going to be as obvious as it would be if it was a larger size of rickrack. It just gives a slightly different look. I'm just so excited about how many variations we've come up with here, just using basic stitches, changing the way we're aligning those stitches to the rickrack. Even though my rickrack is basted down, it's not tight to the fabric all the way across, so I do have to play with that a little bit. I'm definitely finding it helps to come in a little ways away from the edge, not be right on the edge. I am going to stitch out past the end of that one just to keep the pattern going and come back and tack it down. When I'm making my knots on these, I'm coming up and making sure I'm behind the rickrack, and that way my knots won't show on the front. There is the herringbone stitch done completely on the rickrack following the points, and I really like that one. I've not seen that one done. I haven't seen most of these done. So it just goes to show how many possibilities there are, and I'm sure as you go, you can just continue to think of more and more. Let's try another slight variation on that. On this next one, I want to come up and I want to make my things cross up here above the rickrack. So I'm coming down I'm leaving quite a gap here above the rickrack where I do my little back stitch and below. This one won't attach the rickrack real well, and so you may want to have some beads added to it or some other stitch, or you may need to baste it in place to make this one hold it tightly, because this one's going to allow a lot of movement in that rickrack if you don't do something else with it. A lot of people use herringbone stitch and it stitches up really fast and yet has such a nice impact. And I mean, we haven't really done anything to change this stitch at all. We've just changed the placement of it. Come over the rickrack. I'm going to go down just to help hold that in place a little bit. But that's a really interesting one. Again, it follows the rickrack, but it kind of expands it outwards. So that one's a nice option. Okay, I think that takes care of that thread. Let's look at the next one. I think we could also take that herringbone, and let's see here. How do I want to do this one? We could offset it on the rickrack as well. I have a little more room on the bottom side, so I'm going to kind of focus this on the bottom side. You could do this either direction. So this one, we're going to do kind of a mix of this one and this one. So we're going to come up and put our stitch on the top there. But now we're going to come up and do one that goes beyond. And I'm trying to always bring those out nice and even across. And then on the rickrack. So this one will obviously do a better job of holding that rickrack in place because it's going through the rickrack on one side. I feel like I'm getting over too far. And I'm going to come down and just end that right there. So there's a partly on and partly off variation. It's not appreciably different, but it definitely will secure that rickrack a little bit better. It leaves that whole edge free if you wanted to do something or you wanted to emphasize that edge. So I'm enjoying that one. Let's see if we've got another one we want to do. I think I'd like to do one more variation with herringbone. Figure out where my rickrack is at. Oh, we have Finn with us. Hi, Finn. How's my buddy? Hi, sweetheart. Yeah. He likes to lay in my arms when I stitch, but it makes it really difficult. So unfortunately, this is not the time, not when I'm filming. So let's do another one. This last one that we're going to do today, I'm going to do a two-toned one. So we're going to start off with this stitch here. So I'm going to do that all the way across, and then we're going to come back with a different thread and go over it, but also with herringbone. So it's going to be pretty straightforward and simple. So I'm not going to talk much through this first part because it's what we already did back in the very first video. Okay, and I'm going to knot that off. And now we're going to come back with our other thread, and we're going to do another one right over the top. And I've done this in a different color thread so you can really see. And now, basically, we're doing this variation here. But we're doing it opposite in pattern. And mine are pretty close together, so I can't come out much taller than what I'm doing here. But layering stitches is a wonderful way to add depth and interest. And when I'm doing fancy seams, I often will do this. Now as I'm doing this, I realize I'm coming out and putting these crosses. If I kept this, it's right in line with that. You can see. But it's still this basic herringbone, so it goes really fast. There we go. So there's a nice layered herringbone to finish that one off. Again, just basic herringbone, and we've just done 2 layers of it over the top. Let's knot that off. There we go. So there's our 5 stitches. Our maidenhair, herringbone done on the rickrack, herringbone done off the rickrack above the points, and then we have it half on and half off, and then we have it 2 layers. The first one came across in the valleys and the other one comes across above the points. And so there are our 5 stitches for today, and I'm real happy with those. And I love the way it's filling in this sampler. I think when it's all done, it's going to look so much better with all of those filled in. So we have 5 more pieces of rickrack to go on this sampler. And we're going to focus on chevron stitch on this, so we'll try that next time. I hope you've had fun stitching with me today and playing with the true maidenhair stitch and with herringbone. They're 2 of my favorite stitches. I've really enjoyed this session. I'm so glad we're filling in the gaps on my sampler. I think it's going to look so much better. I'm really pleased with how it's going. Happy stitching, have a beautiful day, and I'll see you in the next video.